Have you ever stopped to think that the greatest event in human history was not only recorded in sacred books, but also echoed through creation itself? At the height of God's divine plan for humanity's redemption, the final minutes of Jesus on the cross were not only physical agony, they were accompanied by cosmic and supernatural signs that, to this day, intrigue scholars, believers, and even skeptics. And here's the first question I want you to keep in your heart. If even the earth trembled and the sun hid at the sacrifice of Christ, how can you and I continue living as if nothing happened? Before we reach the extraordinary facts, we need to step back and look at the setting. Jesus carried his own cross, not just a piece of wood, but the symbol of the crushing weight of humanity's sins. With every step, mockery; with every stumble, insults; with every drop of sweat and blood, the reminder that he was assuming a debt that was not his, but ours. Have you ever carried something that wasn't your fault? An emotional burden from a broken family, a mistake you didn't commit, but were accused of. That's just a human glimpse of what Christ endured for us. On Mount Calvary, the Son of God was nailed to the cross. The crown of thorns pressed against his head was not just an instrument of torture, but also a symbol of humanity's rejection. The nails piercing his hands and feet were not just steel and pain, but the visible mark of a love that chose to suffer. His suspended body made breathing difficult. Each breath was a battle. And even so, amid the pain, he still found strength to say, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Have you ever forgiven someone who deeply hurt you, even while you were still bleeding from the wound they caused? That's exactly what Jesus did, and not only for those soldiers before the cross, but for you and me. Beside him, two criminals, one, trapped in pride, rejected grace; the other, broken, acknowledged his guilt and cried out, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus, even in agony, replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise," in Luke 23:43. Here we have a powerful parallel for our lives. The cross always places before us a choice. Which of the two thieves do we choose to be? The one who hardens his heart, or the one who surrenders? If you're with me so far, I want to ask you something. Comment below. I choose redemption. This simple act of writing is a way of publicly declaring your decision, and it may even inspire someone who reads your comment. Now, we come to the first great supernatural phenomenon, the darkness that covered the earth. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, the sunlight vanished. It wasn't a common eclipse. It wasn't just an astronomical coincidence. The Gospels report this fact as a direct intervention of God. In antiquity, darkness in broad daylight was seen as a sign of mourning, judgment, divine intervention. At that moment, it was as if the heavens themselves were mourning the death of the Son of God. Imagine being in broad daylight, and suddenly, a dense darkness covers everything. The silence, the fear, the feeling that something greater is happening. That was the scene at Calvary. The prophet Amos 8-9 had written centuries earlier. "In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight." And there was the fulfillment of prophecy. In the midst of darkness, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In Matthew 27-46, perhaps the most human cry in the entire Bible, the one who always lived in perfect communion with the Father now experienced the weight of separation as he bore the sin of the world. Have you ever felt abandoned by God? Have you prayed without an answer, cried out in the silence of the night without hearing anything? Know this, Jesus went through that too, and precisely because he experienced that void, today we can be certain that we will never truly be alone. C.S. Lewis once wrote something profound about this. When we put aside our trust in ourselves and look to Christ, we discover that he has already been in the deepest abyss, and that is why He can lift us up from there. The first supernatural sign, the darkness, was not only a signal for that generation, but also a reminder for you and me. The cross reveals that sin brings darkness, but the presence of Christ can turn even the densest night into a promise of light. If you've ever faced a moment when it seemed like the sun went out in your life, this is the time to remember. Jesus already conquered that night. And before continuing to the next facts, let me ask you something important. If this message has already touched your heart, like this video now, it's not just a click, it's a way to spread the light of the gospel across YouTube, so more people can encounter this message. Now we come to another impressive phenomenon. An earthquake shook Calvary at the exact moment Jesus gave up His Spirit. Matthew 27:51 says, "At that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life." Can you imagine the impact? The crowd mocked. The soldiers performed their duties without fully understanding what was happening. And suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The earth shook. Rocks split. Tombs opened. It was as if all of creation was reacting to the death of the Creator. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "At the death of Christ, nature did not remain indifferent, for He did not come only to redeem men, but to restore the whole cosmos." The earthquake wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was a visible spiritual sign that something profound was happening. Sin, death, hell, everything was being shaken. Now, let's bring this closer to you. Have you ever faced a moment when everything around you seemed to quake? Losing a loved one, losing a job, watching a relationship fall apart. These tremors feel like they rip the ground from beneath our feet. And it's exactly in these moments that the cross becomes even more relevant. If even the universe trembled at the death of Jesus, it means God understands our personal earthquakes. But here's the good news. Just as the Calvary earthquake did not end in destruction, but in resurrection, the tremors in your life can also pave the way for something new. Write in the comments, even in the shaking, "I trust in Christ." This phrase can become a confession of faith, not only for you but also for someone who needs to read it and find courage. And here we come to an extraordinary detail. The tombs were opened, and many saints were raised to life. This event is one of the most mysterious in the New Testament. The death of Jesus was so powerful that life began to overflow immediately. It's as if Calvary was the key that unlocked the prison of death. Think about it. The death of Christ didn't just give us eternal life someday in the future. It already began to show signs of victory at that very moment. Have you ever seen something in your life that seemed lost but was suddenly restored? A relationship that seemed dead but revived? A hope that seemed extinguished but was rekindled? Those are echoes of that resurrection power that was already manifesting at the cross. C.S. Lewis beautifully expressed this reality. The resurrection is not just a historical fact, but the window through which we see that all sad things will not only become bearable, but will finally be undone. And then came another supernatural fact, the tearing of the temple veil. The veil was a thick curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, the place of God's presence, from the rest of the temple. Only the high priest could enter there, and only once a year, on the Day of Atonement. It was a symbol of the distance between God and man. But when Jesus died, the veil was torn from top to bottom, not from bottom to top, as if it had been human work, but from top to bottom, divine work. What does this mean? That the barrier between God and humanity was removed. That now anyone, anywhere, can have direct access to God's presence. This is not just old theology, it's practical life. It means you don't need complex rituals, religious titles, or intermediaries to speak to God. Through Christ, you already have access to the Father. Imagine a father who works all day in a luxurious office, full of protocols. anyone needs to schedule, go through a secretary, security, a waiting line. But the man's little child doesn't need any of that. He can simply open the door, walk in, and jump into his father's lap. That's what the tearing of the veil represents. Free access to the Father. Have you ever stopped to think that you can talk to him at any time, anywhere, without ceremony? That's the revolution the cross brought. C.S. Lewis reminds us, Christ did not come to make bad people good, but to make dead people alive. And that's what happened that day. The dead came back to life, hardened hearts were broken, the temple barrier fell. If your heart is trembling right now, as if this message were directly for you, know this, it's not a coincidence. The same cross that shook the earth that day is shaking your heart today. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. Here at C.S. Lewis Mastery, we dive deep into these truths that transform. And when you subscribe, you don't just follow. You become part of a community of people awakening together to the living reality of Christ. Now we approach the climax of this story, the final moments of Jesus' life on the cross. Matthew 27-46 records one of the most mysterious moments. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Those words still echo today as a cry of pain, loneliness, and surrender. And here we must understand something. Jesus, who had never known separation from the Father, now experienced the weight of the world's sins. It was as if at that moment he was plunged into total darkness, bearing not only our failures, but also the very feeling of abandonment we so often carry. Have you ever felt alone, forgotten even by God? Know this, Jesus lived that on the cross. He not only understands, he carried that pain in place of each of us. C.S. Lewis wrote, "The Son of God became man so that men might become sons of God." And it was in that cry of abandonment that this divine exchange was completed. He was rejected so that we could be accepted. John 19:30 records his final words, "It is finished." Simple words, but filled with eternity. It wasn't a cry of defeat. It was the shout of victory. The divine plan was complete. The debt paid, death defeated. Imagine someone paying off a debt you could never repay. That's what Christ did. He not only erased the negative balance, but opened an account of eternal riches for you. We've already spoken of the torn veil, but now we need to go deeper. That veil wasn't just a thick curtain. It was a spiritual symbol of separation. It represented the barrier between sinful man and a holy God. When Jesus gave up his spirit, the veil was torn from top to bottom. This means the initiative came from God. We didn't open the way to him, he opened the way to us. C.S. Lewis magnificently expressed it. Christianity is not man climbing up to God. It is God coming down to man. Now every one of your prayers has direct access to the throne. Every one of your tears is seen by the Father without intermediaries. What was once closed has been permanently opened. And then came a striking detail. Matthew 27-54 says, "When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, 'Surely he was the Son of God.'" Think about it. A Roman soldier, hardened by war, accustomed to brutality, witnessed that scene and surrendered in confession. It wasn't the religious leaders who recognized him first. It wasn't the crowd. It was a foreigner, a hardened man, someone who was there just carrying out orders. This shows us that the cross has the power to break hearts of stone. If the centurion could surrender, anyone can. Perhaps you're watching now and you feel distant, skeptical, hardened inside. But know this, the same cross that moved that soldier's heart can transform yours today. Now, maybe you wonder, what does all this change in my life here and now? Let's make it practical. The darkness at noon reminds us that even when everything seems lost, God is still working. The earthquake shows us that life's tremors can be the prelude to resurrection. The opened tombs guarantee that death does not have the final word. The torn veil assures us of direct access to God, with no barriers. The centurion's confession reveals that no one is too far to be reached by grace. Now, take a deep breath for a moment. Which of these truths speaks loudest to your heart today? Share in the comments. Your experience may be the answer someone needs. When you face injustice and the temptation to respond with anger, remember Christ forgiving on the cross. When you feel like you're carrying an unbearable burden, remember that He already carried the greatest weight for you. When it feels like everything has collapsed, remember, the earthquake at Calvary was just the beginning of a new story. Christ overcame so that you can also overcome. C.S. Lewis said, "They killed him, but after 3 days, the whole world knew they could not keep him dead." The cross is not the end, it's the beginning. It's the greatest spiritual earthquake in history, shaking not only the earth, but also the course of humanity. And today, 2,000 years later, that impact continues. The question is, will you just watch from afar, or will you let the cross shake your life too? If you've stayed with me this far, it wasn't by accident. God is speaking to you, so I invite you now. Subscribe to the C.S. Lewis Mastery channel. Here, we dive deep into reflections that unite Christian faith with the wisdom of great thinkers like C.S. Lewis. Each video is designed to feed your mind and warm your heart, and more. Share this video with someone who needs hope. Hit the like button so this message can reach more people. See you in the next video.